Welcome to Craig Walker Coaching. My name is Craig Walker, and I help people break free from the paralysis of self-doubt to live the life that they were born to love. My training, it's Christ-centered, it's biblically based, it's backed by science, and it's endorsed by those who've tried it and they've experienced radical transformation. Now, if you're not a believer, you need to hear me say, that's okay. I think when you discover how much God believes in you, you will have no problem believing in Him. Well, thanks for joining me today. I hope you'll subscribe to my channel. Click the bell so that you'll be notified each time a new video is posted. Also, if you like today's talk, make sure you hit the like button. And don't forget to leave your questions and your comments down below. Now, here's a quick heads up for you. Mark your calendar for February the 16th. This is the kickoff of the next Truly a Masterpiece training program. Just over 2 weeks away. The link for registration is in the notes. Now, let me tell you something. Going on outside here today at my house, contractors are here and they're excavating, digging footers and putting in forms to build our foundation. After living on this property for 7 months, we're finally going to get to build our house. Here's my hope for you. I tell you about that because I hope that, well, you will join the Truly a Masterpiece training program and you will use this at next, 8 to 9 weeks to lay the foundation for the best of your life, an incredible life that is to come. And then 10 to 12 months down the road, when I look back and see the house that we built, you will be able to look back and see the life that you've built because of the foundation that you laid in the Truly a Masterpiece training. Don't forget to sign up. Again, the link is in the notes. All right. Today, I want to talk to you, and I'm going to tell you something that I really don't like to admit. I want to tell you about the one sin that I did not want to confess. Years. It took me years to deal with this particular sin. Now, looking back, I think I see the resistance to admit my struggle to God and anyone else. It wasn't so much resistance as it was denial. I just didn't want to admit that I struggled with this particular sin. Now, to understand, you probably need some context, so let me just tell you the backdrop to this story. After I trusted Christ, God changed my life dramatically. And I saw God show up in incredible ways, just demonstrating how faithful and how good He really is. Within a few months of trusting Christ, I began to sense that new desires. I found myself thinking that God wanted me in full-time Christian ministry. And how that all came about is a subject for another day. But what you need to hear today is just how God showed up and demonstrated His goodness. After Debbie and I came to an agreement that God indeed was calling me to change careers, we knew we'd have to change our spending habits. From the other job I had, I'd made a lot of money and I spent a lot of money. And she spent a lot of money. But quitting that job to go to Bible college, well, that was going to change a lot. So we had to downsize our financial footprint to be able to pull this off. So we started making plans to sell our house that we had built just a couple of years earlier in the Brownsville Country Club. I would need to sell a half ownership in an airplane that I had just bought like a year before, and I also had a boat, and I really needed to get rid of it. We were just spending way too much money. But to complicate matters, the economy where we lived along the U.S. and Mexico border, it had just crashed. Wealthy Mexicans that were living in the U.S. now were impoverished. They walked out of their houses and they went back to Mexico, leaving many of these homes fully furnished. So the housing market in Brownsville, it was just dead. It was tanked. Now, we put our house on the market with all that going on. We agreed to take less for it than we'd paid for it. We knew we'd lose all of our equity, the down payment that we'd made on it, it all would be gone. We just hoped to sell the house and to get out of it. But even dropping the price like we did, in those first few months, we didn't have anyone to even come and look at it. Not even look at it. That's how bad the economy was. The thought of selling half ownership in an airplane at that point was, ludicrous. Who's got the money to do that kind of thing? I decided that I would call my partner, the guy that owned the other half, and tell him that I was selling out to see if he is interested. And I'd already agreed in my mind that I was going to take several $1,000s less than I'd paid for it just a year earlier. But when I talked to him, told him what I was doing, he never asked me what I was asking for it. He just asked me what I paid for it. So I told him, and he said, yeah, I'll give you your money back on it. And they're like, oh my gosh, God, thank you so much. Because if he'd asked me what I was going to sell it for, I'd have lost a few $1,000s. And by God's grace, he didn't. So God, you're good. Thank you. I put my boat up for sale. Someone I had never met heard our story, how I'd been called into the ministry. I was going to quit my job, I was selling our house, sold my half ownership in an airplane, and was selling the boat too. And so this guy sends a check, but he also put a note inside the set check, said, keep the boat, you've sold enough. I said, whoa, God, thank you, you're awesome. So with the sale of the house, or excuse me, the sale of the airplane, the sale of the boat, we're starting to catch on. We're like, God, you've got this. You've got us, and we can trust you that no matter what. Well, little did we know we had a lot more to learn, and God was certainly there to teach us. A year later, when the date rolled around that we had set for us to leave Brownsville and move to Dallas for me to go to school, well, our house still hadn't sold. It was still in the market. Now, I thought, there's no way we can leave here with that house, and so we'll just stay until it sells, then we can go to school. I did tell my pastor and another friend and ask them their advice, thinking they would say, oh yeah, that's wise thinking. But neither, independently of each other, both men told me, no, we think God called you to go to school. We think that you and others have prayed about the timeline, and we think you should go. We think God is going to provide for you. Now, honestly, to me that sounded like insanity. There wasn't faith involved. That was foolishness. That was my way of thinking. But I did agree that, well, these guys are older and they do know God better than you do. And so on their faith, I took my family and I moved to Dallas to go to Bible college. Well, arriving in Dallas, I got a job. It paid really well. I earned enough money that after giving to our church, we still had enough money to pay rent in Dallas, buy groceries, or pay bills, buy groceries in that order. And what else did we do? Oh, and paid for my tuition. This is kind of a cool story in itself. The whole time I went to school, I crammed a 4-year degree into 5 years. And I never once had, I never didn't have enough to pay my tuition, but once, I should say. Not never, but once. One time, I didn't have enough money to pay the tuition. I went into school and talked to the registrar and told him, hey, I'm going to have to sit out a semester because I don't have the money. And he pulled up my account and just to see where I stood and said, oh yeah. And he said, looks like you don't have to worry about it. Someone came in just yesterday and paid your tuition for this next semester. I'd already signed up for my classes. And I thought, in my mind, I'm thinking, oh, this is an anonymous gift. Some donor comes in because it's a Bible college and they've got money and they just give it to and say, here, if a student ever has a need, help them out. So I asked the registrar if that's what happened. I said, tell me the name and I'll be glad to send them a thank you card. And he said, there is no name, but it says here that someone came in and designated the money for Craig Walker. It's for you. I mean, it's like God leaned over out of heaven, wrote a check and said, this is for you, Craig, in the memo. And just to remind us how good he is and how much he's in control and how well he's going to take care of us. And so obviously we were pretty excited about what God was doing. Well, everything was rocking on. God was providing for everything but the house. The first month that we had a payment that was due, we didn't have the money. And I called the bank and I told them, and they said, well, don't worry about it. You get grace for at least a month and in your contract. And I said, oh, God, thank you. So we had a month taken care of. The next month, though, rolled around. I assumed we'd have the money, and we didn't. And so I called the bank again, and I told them, we don't have the money again. And they said, well, don't worry about it. Someone came in, and they paid your house payment. And I said, are you kidding me? They said, no, I really did. And they told me who it was, and I indebted to them for the rest of my life. So thankful. And but then the next month, the same thing happened again and again. For like 6 months straight, someone came in. The first month, I knew the person. The rest of the time, these were anonymous givers, and I never knew who they were. But what I did know is God again had come through, and he was taking care of us. After these 6 months were over, Debbie and I talked one night before dinner, and we agreed that we think God is using our housing situation just to teach us more of how good he is and that we can rely on him for everything. And that night we sat down to dinner, we gave thanks to God for taking care of us and all that he had done. And then kind of like, and oh yeah, and thank you for our food, amen. And when I said amen, the phone rang. And it was our realtor calling to tell us that he had a contract on our house. And it was a good contract for the full asking price, and the buyers agreed that they were going to pay the closing costs. This is incredible. And so we came back, and I shared that news with Debbie and our 3 little kids at the time. And you know, Debbie and I cried together, thanked the Lord, and amen. Well, before we could eat, the phone rang again. And now it was another person making a second offer on the house. And this person agreed to pay more than we were asking and our closing cost. And I came back and told Debbie, thank God, cried again. And we thought, what just happened? You know what Debbie and I think? We think that God just showed up in a really big way. We think the second offer, it only came for one reason. It was God again signing his name to everything that had just happened to tell us, Craig and Debbie, I've got you. You can trust me. I'm good. Okay? And you know, honestly, we felt like, I think we got it. God is that good. He's going to provide for us. And so with that kind of story and all that God has done, and believe me, I'm just telling you a small piece of what he did. There are many more things like these, that big, that he did, that I'm just not taking time to tell you right now. And with that story, that backdrop, you'll understand when I tell you what I struggled with. This is embarrassing to admit, and it was surely a struggle to admit then. After all that God had done for me, taking us to school, providing, I graduated, and then went on, became a pastor of the church for 6 years in Mesquite, Texas. Was a missions pastor on the border of Brownsville for 3 years. Planted 2 churches. Actually 3 churches, Brownsville, Indianapolis, Indiana, and Salina, Texas. Planted these 3 churches. And with all that going on, I still am dealing with this one sin that I do not want to confess. And you know what my sin was? I was struggling to believe in God's goodness. Don't get me wrong, I believed in God. I believed that God was good. I believed that God would provide for all of our financial needs. But you know, here's what I doubted. I doubted that God could use me in a significant way. You know, I would confess, Lord, something's wrong with me. Lord, I'm not smart enough to do what you want me to do. But here's what I really believed. I really believed down in my soul that God had let me down. He had given me a vision, a calling to do something that I wasn't smart enough to pull off. That was a heavy burden. And it took me years before I ever came to a place that I could confess it. And finally, when I did, I understood that that was a wrong belief. God had never let me down. God was always faithful, always good. The problem was in my belief. Do you ever struggle like that? Do you ever think that you're not enough? You ever feel like that? I'm guessing that many of you said, yeah, I do. And then some others of you said, no, I never think that. And here's what I think. I think you're in denial. I think you're just like me. You just don't want to admit that God has let you down. But this is something I know. Until you do, until you come to grips with what you really believe about God and deal with it, you'll never, ever believe the truth. That unbelief, that subtle resistance to his goodness is holding you back. Now then, that's all I'm going to tell you today, but in my next talk, it's going to drop in a couple of days, I'm going to tell you what you can do, something you can do to kind of reboot your faith and get you back on track with God. So make sure you join me. All right, click the like button if you like today. Ring the bell to make sure you're notified the next time each video is posted. And certainly leave your comments and leave your questions. And then I'll see you back in a couple of days for part 2. And in the meantime, may the Lord help you to live the life that you were born to.